welcome to the fandom track here at ConTinual. Tonight we are talking about the Lucifer finale. So, spoiler alert, we're going there. And before we dive in, I'd love to let my wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Jay.
Hi everyone, I'm Jay Requard. I'm the author of A Wave of Lions, Salt Songs of the Mirror Sea by Falstaff Books, which is out on bookshelves right now. I'm also a graduate of UNC Charlotte with a degree in history and religious studies, and I actually wrote my thesis on the cosmology of the early Christian church, so Lucifer has always been right up my alley.
There you go. Marx?
Yeah, Marx Pyle. I'm the co-host of the podcast Show Entertainment. I'm the author of a urban fantasy Kindle Vella series called Obsidian Monsters, and also just published an anthology with 17 other authors called Dragons of a Different Tale. And watched Lucifer from the beginning. Oh, I also have an MFA in popular fiction too, from Seton Hill. And but yeah, watched Lucifer from the beginning. It's one of my top 5, top 10 at least of all shows.
Okay, and Jean Marie.
Hi, my name's Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between. And I'm primarily here because a lot of people think I'm the devil incarnate. Actually, no, I'm very nice. I really am. But I love Lucifer, especially Dr. Linda.
Very good. I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write urban fantasy, epic fantasy, and near future post-apocalyptic fiction. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But there have always been demons and magic and all kinds of things going on in my books, so Lucifer was a natural fit. So we've talked about the show itself in other panels, but now we're looking at the wrap-up, season 6, and the finale. And what surprised you? Let's start there. Jay?
I was really surprised with how they altered a lot of the structures at the last minute in terms of the typical narratives you expect and the endings that usually come along with them. For example, we started the season with the idea that Lucifer is going to become the king of heaven or the new god. And by the end of that, of course, we get a twist where a completely different character is seated on the throne, and Lucifer has taken on more of a psychopomp role by the end of everything. And I really was impressed with how they were able to switch these spots and these characters kind of seamlessly at the last minute. I really enjoyed how they incorporated Chloe into the overall narrative, which I thought was a hard thing to do, especially after you've consummated a relationship. But overall, I really liked just how they worked out God being able to leave heaven and someone stepped into that role in the universe keep going. That's a question that in fiction in general, I've always liked.
Okay. Marx?
I guess the biggest surprise would have been they went with time travel because they've never done that before in any other shows. When you really think about a lot of the characters, most of their raw power has been pretty weak. I mean, in comparison to some stuff, right? I mean, they're strong, they're tough or mortal, but they don't, blow up buildings or warp space and time. They can slow down time. At least they used to be able to. Or at least one of them could. So it's a big shift in that way. And time travel's tough to do in writing. And I have mixed feelings about how they did the time travel, but it was definitely unexpected. And I liked Rory's wings. That was really cool. Those razor wings. I was somewhat, I don't know, I wasn't surprised because I think they talked about it before the season aired, but they changed up the whole case of the week formula. They dropped that pretty much mostly. And I had mixed feelings about that too. In some ways that worked, but they were so good at juggling that with the storylines that I don't know if they needed to drop it. And what else? Surprise. And it was a pleasant surprise who became God and how a lot of the characters' stories wrapped up. I have mixed feelings about Lucifer and Chloe's, but everybody else's storylines wrapped up really nice, I think.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back to that. Jean Marie?
Well, in contrast to Jay, I never expected Lucifer to wind up on the throne of heaven. That just was not in the cards because of the way that a streaming service, I was looking at this not just as a fan, but as a writer, and the fact that you would never get away with that, even on a streaming service like Netflix, because of where the show is so popular. The heart of Lucifer's popularity, oddly enough, according to all these statistics, is not in the US, it's in the Catholic countries of Latin America. And but that is their one of their primary audience bases. They are not going to have Lucifer wind up on the throne. So it wasn't a question to me of whether or not Lucifer would wind up on the throne. It was a question of who would get it and how would they get that person there. And then you run into, my husband and I had all these discussions about the economy of characters, which is a principle in just about all media, including, though not as much in literary media, but definitely in broadcast media of any stripe. That said, I was very curious to see how they would get to where they wanted to go. And I was a little bit surprised, but I understood why, that they sort of kind of had to drop the case of the week because, if you did that too close to the ending, it would be a very choppy ending. But I thought that they handled the bridge from case of the week, which was essentially the last case of the week that was not tied to the Uber plot, was the magician. But the magician the magician's death at the same time set up the major conflict of the entire series. And I was pleasantly surprised at how, if there is a surprise in any of this, in how well they integrated all of those themes in the last season, because last seasons are hard.
Yes, they are.
And a lot of times the things that people love in a series were not there intentionally from the ending. I'm going to throw up an old series here, Highlander. Nobody expected Mythos to take off. Nobody, and then they had a really hard time dealing with that. And so that the last season of Highlander, in contrast to the last season of Lucifer, I think, was an effing mess.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I think the thing that was most surprising to me was, despite of a couple of glitches here and there, how well they pulled it off.
Yes, very much so.
So what did you like and what didn't you like about the ending? Marx?
The ending specifically?
Or the last season, if you want to take it broader.
Well, let me just give one shout out. Something I liked a lot was the cartoon segment, the episode. I can't remember what was it called. It's Yabba Dabba Do Me. And I love all the titles of shows too. I really liked that, and it wasn't as experimental and awesome as the musical episode they did, but it was still fun. So I think what I liked about the finale, so I liked how all the other storylines ended. I think they worked out really well, with Maze and Eve and just everybody. I think the only thing I didn't, and when Dan moved on, that may not have been the final episode, but the second last one, that was really touching to Trixie and stuff. So I thought that was great. I guess just the only thing I had problems with, me personally, is just how they wrapped up with Lucifer and Chloe. I mean, the very, very end of it, of course, when we flash forward in the future, that's great. Love that song. I love that they finally got together, everything else. I just didn't really buy the reason why they had to be separated that long exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, it's time travel. It's messy. I think shows should do it very sparingly and usually only mess with it if it's a time travel show, and because then they have to think a lot about it. Like 12 Monkeys and a few other shows do a great job of time travel. Other shows struggle if they add that in, like Flash, I think. Unless it's a comedy like Legends of Tomorrow, then it's just sort of like, it'll all work out. You can laugh off the paradoxes and stuff.
Does Legends of Tomorrow know it's a comedy? I'm not sure
Oh,
about
it
that.
does now. It does now. It didn't for the first 2 seasons, but they figured it out.
Say.
Well, I have a question. With the previous seasons of Lucifer, they did a CW crossover with the DC universe. Is it necessarily time travel, or is there a possibility that there's a multiverse going on in?
Yeah,
the
I mean
show?
that's the hint, right? That there's
Yeah.
a broader multiverse and all these shows could be there. So yeah, I mean, but they never touched on that on the main
Right.
Lucifer show, and that was fun to see because of course, well, Constantine got to meet him in that crossover, and that was nice. It'd been pretty awesome, right? If Constantine made an appearance on Lucifer. Anyway, but that's the thing. The time travel element bothered me a little bit. I feel like what happened, I feel like on paper it made more sense whenever you saw the actors. Like, for example, the scene, I hate to be all negative Nancy about something, but the one scene with oh my gosh, Lamech, yeah, where he's like, I'm going to kill your daughter and stuff, and
Oh yeah,
got the arrow, and then Lucifer just like kneels in front of him and goes, just kill me. And I'm just like, dude, you're like with an arm reach now. I mean, there's other scenarios where I could see where you're like, oh no, sacrifice my life. But whenever you're like that close to that human guy who has a knife that could hurt you, or a blade, it felt weird. And I think that's blocking with directing and all that stuff. Anyway, so that's the only thing. The time travel element, the reason to separate them for so long, for rest of Chloe's human mortal life, it felt a little forced. And I think maybe if they just put a little more, if they had thought it through a little more or whatever, if they just tried to do a little twist on it to make it make sense. So time travel is tough because it's a whole paradox, right? Like, well, if she would never have to travel back unless Lucifer had left her, but Lucifer would never have left her unless she traveled back, and that's a problem.
It's a loop.
It's a loop.
I think we still get stuck with what's called the moonlighting effect, which is this deeply held myth by the powers that be that God forbid you ever let the main couple get together, because people who finally don't have sexual tension then suddenly become completely boring and unworthy of being the leads. And it's like, no, dude, that's when the hard stuff starts happening.
Right?
Getting together is easy. Staying together takes brass balls.
Yeah.
But people in Hollywood don't stay married long enough to know that, I guess.
Yeah.
So
They haven't
Well,
experienced
maybe
that.
they
right.
think it's too hard. That could always be the idea, that they think it's too hard, and because they have they have very little experience of it. It's hard to
it's
write it.
mythological to them.
Well,
I
it's
think it's the
mythological.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jean Marie, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to say that, it's they don't have an experience, so they don't know how to write it and give it shape, if you will, a narrative shape. So, Jake?
Well, to be a bit coarse, I think one of the places where it started changing, especially when I was growing up, was the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I thought that was really the first movie where they tried to depict like a married couple who was on the outs, and one of the reasons they were on the outs is because they weren't having not only like a good internal relationship, they weren't having a good physical relationship either. And that was the first movie where they actually dealt with that in terms of like, okay, married couples still have to have sex, they still have to have some sort of romantic tension between them. For a long time in television, it felt like they really just kind of dropped that entirely. And I think a lot of the shows that kind of get by on it today that have married couples that are really good and have really quality storytelling behind them don't eschew from telling those stories or dealing with the idea that, like, they're not Ricky and Lucy sleeping in 2 beds anymore. And I think
people didn't do that?
Yeah. Well, man, there's some weird reality shows now where like married couples sleep in like 2 separate houses. So things are all weird again.
If all those couples in the 1950s and 60s really slept in separate beds, how are any of us here?
Exactly.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So Jean Marie, what about you? What did you like or didn't like about the last season, or how it wrapped up?
Well, from a story standpoint, and once you introduce that time travel element, you're caught in that loop. So I understood why. But I agree with Marx that it was kind of forced, whereas the other seasons, it wasn't quite as forced, but they had no idea of what kind of conflict to give Rory, without throwing her back in time and giving her daddy issues. And let's face it, daddy issues were a significant portion of the entire series.
Mhm.
So yeah, I had some problems with that. That said, I thought the whole effort to be a good dad retroactively was hilarious. And I did enjoy that. The other thing that bothered me was that for most of for most of the season, Ella was the fruitcake.
Mhm.
And I didn't think that that served her character as well as it should. I did enjoy the Maze Eve dynamics. Those were a lot of fun, especially, the way that they mirrored what was actually going on with Lucifer about, I don't want to go rule in hell. I really don't want to go back to hell.
Mhm.
I've spent these past few years going, oh, you need to get back and be the Lord of hell. And really what I was trying to do was tell myself that I wanted to go back. No. And I like that dynamic. But the thing that really gave me the giggles, and I'm quite sure everybody here had the same reaction I did, was when we found out that Dr. Linda was writing a book.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was my favorite episode.
Oh yeah.
Jay, how about you?
So, as I previously mentioned, I really liked how most of the characters ended. My biggest disappointment with the season, and even though they ultimately let him pass on to heaven to be with Charlotte, I thought Dan Espinosa's narrative through the final season was just kind of flat. They kept him a lot in purgatory, and even when they brought him back out, it was really only there for comedic effect until he got to have his closing moment with Trixie. And while that was a really touching, beautiful moment, especially between the two actors, I just thought that the way they handled that character he could have been more involved with the storylines than the way he was presented. I just kind of don't like puppet characters on the side that are there to provide that sort of comedic relief when the actual characters themselves are doing that for you. When you already have the banter between Lucifer and Chloe and all the other characters, Dan just kind of stood out there for me as a sore thumb. So that's kind of it.
Now, what about loose ends? When a show runs more than a couple of years, there are always plot threads and characters and places where the series changed direction, and it's almost impossible to come back and get all of those wrapped up in a final season or a final few episodes. Were there any loose ends that really stuck out to you? Jean Marie?
Well, it's sort of hard because we had such a large break due to the switch to Netflix, and then the closure of just about every video, movie, anything during the current unpleasantness. So I'm not entirely sure that I can identify the loose ends at this point. There were a couple of things that struck me as odd as we were going through, and I was hoping that somebody would deal with them. And the most notable one was okay, we've got a bunch of angels who are named. All right. We've got Michael. We've got Gabriel.
Yeah.
We've got Azrael. I'm mangling that one. We've got Amenadiel. We got all these strays. Whatever happened to Raphael?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big question when it comes to the status of the angels and actually what happens to them afterwards. One thing that I found interesting about the show, I'm writing a urban fantasy series for Falstaff right now that stars an Catholic exorcist who has to rescue a Nephilim, and Nephilim's played a kind of a big role in the final season of Lucifer. There's always a question in biblical sources about God's origin and how God actually delineated powers, and in some ways the series dealt with this. If you have a deity who can basically get off the throne and leave, and then someone related to him can kind of just step onto it, what does that really mean in terms of defining God in a serious way, in terms of holding together a universe? This is a really big cosmological question religious scholars are dealing with, especially now with quantum theory, rising up and giving a lot of weird kind of segues into some religious thoughts. But one area when it comes to like certain angels not being there and certain angels certainly being there is whether or not, as a loose end, if Amenadiel takes the throne of heaven, okay, cool, new God. Can he just drop it whenever he wants? Is this kind of a revolving position? In some ways, the character of Amenadiel taking the role of God and kind of democratizing the position in terms of him being in heaven, kind of coordinating with the angels, and then him being down on earth, still working with humans, that's a cool idea. But when you're really thinking about it from a world building and universal perspective, it really raises some very dangerous and interesting questions. For example, the previous God who left, he didn't leave this season, did he? Did he leave last season?
He left late last season, yeah.
Right, late last season. That is a big loophole that the show will never answer. But to me, it's one of the really puzzling things that I kind of keep going back to as I research other material. But this show has been really informative in some areas because the idea that heaven is a democracy and you can kind of switch roles of people and it keep going is in some ways a really cool idea, but it's a very complexing and in some ways problematic one if you're trying to write it from a...
And it also, the other aspect of that, though, is that what it does to the, quote, sin of Lucifer. Because if you're talking a democratic structure, or at least a structure with a revolving leader, then the betrayal, then the reason for the being ejected to hell becomes very, very peculiar because, okay, why, if this is how it's going to happen, if there is this revolving door, because there's nothing to prevent the old God from coming in and saying goodbye to the new God and, whatever.
Or any God.
Yeah, exactly. What makes the sin of Lucifer, the sin of pride, which is, if you look at Dante's cosmology, places him in the deepest pit of hell with the betrayers such as Judas and the others and Brutus, then his sin is mitigated and there is no reason for hell. But I didn't, I honestly didn't expect them to go there, just from their audience standpoint.
The ending between Lucifer and Chloe especially is a lot of fun in some ways because without saying it out loud, they basically transform hell into a new alternate realm. Arguably, like by the time the show ends, the term hell shouldn't even really apply to wherever Lucifer's working right now as, the cosmological therapist of our times.
It's more like a purgatory in a way because they have to work.
Exactly.
It is.
Well, in many ways, the show goes back more to Jewish scripture than it does Christian scripture, because the original Jewish idea of hell is that you would actually go down to this kind of purifying flame and you would have all your sins burned away, but everyone would ultimately raise back up to heaven to be with God. So in some ways, the show's kind of mimicking that, just without the fire. Instead of fire, you get therapy.
Some might say that was worse.
Yeah, which hurts worse? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a cool idea. I also like the theme. I'm sorry if I'm rattling on. But I really like the theme that instead of God being a king or ruler, God is a parent, and kind of a fucked up one, pardon, but kind of a messed up parent that, you know, the kids have to work with, and you kind of have to have that mediation and remediation. You have to have those tough conversations and arguments, and you have to sit down and go, well, you did this and you did that. And ultimately, I really liked how they tried to recast the divine as something just this close to human, which is really, you know, I think if people wanted to have a proper spiritual relationship, that's kind of what we would want it to be, you know. We want to be that close to the divine, and in many ways the divine be just like us.
Well, it's interesting taking a view of hell as being therapeutic instead of punishment based. It's
Right.
it's the place where you get your crap together before advancing, as opposed to, well, you didn't figure it out while you're alive, so you're just going to burn forever. I mean, you could make a good argument for that. Marx, how about you?
Yeah. Well, the therapy really works perfectly because Lucifer begins therapy in the first episode, right? So it's kind of full, it comes to a completion
Full
there.
circle.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I forgot what was the question.
Loose ends.
Loose ends. Oh, yes, yes. You know, I was thinking about it. I was trying to rack my brain after you said that question originally, and I can't think of too many like big loose ends off the top of my head, really. I mean, there are characters that I would like to see come back, you know, like I can't remember her name, but the one that pretend married Lucifer, you know, she was a really cool character, and she was in 2 different episodes. Been cool to see her come back.
Oh yeah, and Rebecca De Mornay, I believe, was Chloe's mom, and I kept expecting her to show up at the end. So
that's true.
Right.
And yeah, there are certain characters I wouldn't mind seeing pop back up. But otherwise, you know, there are some loopholes in some of their plot lines that there's no reason to revisit. I love the Sinnerman storyline and Kane and everything. I loved all that and how it came out overall. But there were a couple, like when you look back at the season, there was a couple of logical, like, wait a minute, but why, you know, they didn't really make a lot of sense. But no reason to revisit that though. Just move on.
Oh yeah, but I love the character of Abel trying to seduce women with his sheep.
Isn't that hilarious? Yeah, and Tom Welling's a great Kane, and there was a lot. That was a great season. But no, I can't really think of any major loopholes off the top of my head. I mean, I would like to see Castiel at least once. It would have been great if he was like a supernatural actor played him. Just an inside joke.
Hey, we got Chuck. Why didn't we get Castiel?
Yeah. I thought it would have been, when I saw that he was cast, I didn't know what he was playing. I thought, you know, it would be perfect is if when they were trying to pick who's God, like he comes out, he's Castiel, and he goes, "I'll be God," and they all just laugh at him and stuff. It'd be perfect, but we got a cool villain.
Well, and Richard Speight Jr. directed at least one episode. And so you definitely had some supernatural crossover there. There's a great picture from San Diego Comic-Con where Tom Ellis and Jared Padalecki are walking down the street, and it's like, are we really sure Lucifer and his perfect vessel should be allowed to be out together?
Yes, but what more perfect vessel could there be than Tom Ellis? God damn.
True. This is true. So what about character growth? We've touched on it a little bit here, but what about, you know, when you look at the characters in the first season, you look at the characters at the end, where did growth happen? Maybe where didn't it? Where did growth go weird? Jay, what do you think?
I really like the growth of Dr. Linda. I think Jean Marie mentioned earlier that Dr. Linda is one of her favorite characters. Mine too. I really like characters that play witnesses to big events and kind of have to interpret it, and especially when she finally gets the gumption to write a book. I thought the way she grew, the more she got new information, had to accept that she was dealing with the divine and infernal, and just as a therapist and just kind of as a human being, how that character handled that every step of the way, I thought it was very natural. I really liked in the last two seasons how she's kind of frantic and not getting along easily with Amenadiel. I thought that was a good quirk, even though they have a really great relationship. And I just thought that her growth, for me, was the best of the entire cast.
Okay. Marx.
Yeah, I think the show's done a great job giving character arcs for all the characters. I mean, Maze, of course, went from betraying them every season pretty much to finally like growing a soul maybe and getting married and stuff. Eve found her kind of unique identity, not just becoming whoever she was dating. They all kind of found, Ella is probably the only one that really didn't have a change or growth a whole lot. I mean, there was plot lines, and that's partly, I don't think, I mean, she's such a fun character, but she never got an opportunity to grow a whole lot. She had to deal with some dark thoughts, but in general, I guess what it is, I really wanted Ella and Dan to have an adventure like her and the ghost in one adventure episode. It would have paid off so much with her book and with seeing Azrael and everything in their childhood or younger years. But otherwise, all the characters grew a lot. They all did a great job. Obviously, Lucifer's the main growing arc in the whole season. And I think that's one of the things that the show did really well. Because season one, you look at them, and in some ways, I don't like some of the characters in season one. They're all fighting each other quite a bit and plotting against each other. And it's season two where I think they found a dynamic where I was like, oh yeah, I'm really liking all these characters, and I like their dynamic all really well, and I could really roll with it. So the answer is everybody.
Okay. Jean Marie.
I did, it was pretty obvious to me even the first season that this was going to be a show about finding family. And yes, they had their share of daddy issues that went on a little bit long, and then they had their mommy issues, and they had this, that, and the other thing. But I think that everybody had an arc with, as you said, Mark's one exception, and that was Ella. And I think part of the problem was that she was kind of where she should be right from the start. She was as I heard somebody describe an employee once, the little bar of soap in the scuttle of coal. Just this little bar of soap, this little clean thing in this dirty world. And so, as you say, she had plot, she didn't have arc because she was all good to begin with. She didn't need to grow, but everybody else, I mean, Lucifer starting out, Lucifer's sin in the first season wasn't so much that he was the Lord of Hell or the great deceiver. It was, he was so damn self-centered. It was all about him. He had to learn that it was about other people as well. Linda had, Dr. Martin had to have her very narrow view of everything can be explained by Jung, Freud, and their successors to, oh, hell. And, oh my goodness, I just had an angel's baby. But even so, it was about building family, and then for her also reconnecting with past family and playing out some of the bigger issues of, how do you deal with the fact that your parents are not perfect? And that was something. How do you deal with the fact that you are going to be stuck with your brothers and sisters and all of your relations because you have a tie that cannot be broken, and you have something that sets you apart as a tribe that means you cannot be totally with humans, for example? Or do you even want to be with humans? Maze, like, oh, these are inferior creatures. Let's go back to hell and torture them to, wait a minute, am I just reflecting my own misery back on that? So I think that they all pretty much had a really, really good arc, but and I liked that the way they went, because to me it was breaking down family and then rebuilding it into something that you can safely and joyously integrate with. And I also liked, and this was one of the most surprising things to me about the show overall, was here it was on Fox Network, and it was one of the most diverse, one of the most compassionate overall stories being told on television for most of its run. It was unique in that regard, and I really liked that.
So as we wrap things up here, I know we've touched on a lot of things, but is there anything that I haven't thought to ask you? Maybe something you wish had happened, or wish had happened differently, or a relationship, or that we haven't touched on? Anything you've just been sitting there dying to get a chance to say that you haven't yet? This is it.
Someone brought up, actually everyone's brought up Ella. I wish that the investigation into the archangels and Lucifer and everything that she went through in the last season was a little bit more developed. I actually could have done without, and I can't remember his name for the life of me. I really didn't like that character. The
Carol?
Carol, yes.
Oh yeah.
The Carol storyline did nothing for me. It felt like puppy love that just kind of kept going around and around every episode. I really wish they had taken that time with her to it. I agree with Jean Marie, the soap and the coal. I agree with that analogy a lot. I think that's a great analogy, but I thought that last season was the time to like really nail home that like she's a real detective and that she can do this on her own, that she's an equal member of the team. She's just not the plucky sidekick that shows up and says inspirational things about God. I really think that more of her investigation could have been shown, but that's really it for me.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I would like Ella to do more, and it was a very heartbreaking scene whenever she, confronted everybody about how she was the only one out of the loop at that point, because she would have believed it, been the first one to believe a lot of that. I guess there is a maybe like, why did Azrael talk to her so much and stuff when she was younger? What was up with that? So that could be a loose thread too. I always wondered if they were going to do something more of her than ever did. Like supernatural wise, because I think, like, be wrong, because I haven't read the Lucifer comic books. I need to correct that soon. But and I know it's very different. But there's a character that's like L or it's I think it's spelled one letter different than Ella, and that she's like a sidekick of his, at least for part of it, and she's like the sidekick and see ghosts. And I was always wondering if they're going to go there with her or not, and but they never did, and maybe that's okay. But it would, as a missed opportunity, I think, with Dan being a ghost, it could have had more interaction, because it was weird, right? Like Jay mentioned that he's a ghost. I felt like they ignored him so much in the season. They're like, oh yeah, he's in hell. Oh well, too bad. And then, oh yeah, he's a ghost now. Oh well, whatever. We're doing other stuff. It's like, guys, poor Dan over here. That might have been cool if maybe instead of having so much time with her puppy love boyfriend, if maybe Ella had seen Dan and could interact with them on something. So
I have a question. And this just popped into my head with Dan, the purgatory that Lucifer builds for Dan is so awful. It's just so awful. What's the difference between that and hell? Did he even build a purgatory? Was there such a thing, or was he just telling Dan, oh, this is purgatory, don't worry about it?
Well, he wasn't getting burnt, which was, physical pain was not part of it. And I think that's what made it purgatory.
yeah, he didn't actually get tortured. The demon is going to play.
I don't know, man. I hate table tennis.
Yeah, I can understand that. I would have liked to have had, I agree that I don't think that they integrated the Dan storyline, like I understand that they had to have a sacrificial lamb plot wise, that, you had to have somebody die, and Dan had sins to atone for.
Mhm.
But I don't think that the post-death experience related to the sins he needed to atone for.
Mhm.
And I think that that was a missed opportunity. But then again, one cannot expect any show to be perfection. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Cowboy Bebop, the original anime, came as close as a contained series can be to perfection. And there were still a couple of things in there I went, I don't understand. Why did you make this choice when you had this? So,
Well, folks, we have blown through our time, and it's been a terrific discussion. Thank you all so much for this. Let's let everybody say where people can find you online. And if you've got a new or upcoming or recent book, be sure you tell us about it. Jean Marie.
okay, my most recent story out there is Fire Sale in the Modern Deity's Guide to Surviving Humanity by Zombies Need Brains. You can find it on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. And you can find me at jeanmarieward.com.
Okay, Marx.
Hey, you can find me at marxpyle.com. Also the podcast Genretainment at genretainment.com. And any new books that I'm working on, either collaboratively or on my own, you can find through marxpyle.com or at cabotcrossing.com. And also I'm on Twitter at Mr. Marx.
Okay, Jay.
My new book, A Wave of Lines, is available through Falstaff Books at all booksellers. You can also find me at jrequard.com or at jrequard on Twitter. Thank you very much. My wife thought this was cute.
Old school,
Yeah, like it.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, all the social media's variation of those. The new book is Shutdown Crew, which is the fourth in the Wasteland Marshals series from Falstaff Books. And coming up on pre-order right now is Wasteland Marshals Volume 1, which is a collection of the first 4 novellas in that series. So if you bought them separately, the new one's out. And if you haven't yet, well, what are you waiting for? And the compendium is out. But mostly you can find me here on ConTinual. So thanks again to all of our wonderful, wonderful panelists. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more fandom coming up on ConTinual. So we'll see you online.
Bye.